our team wakes up early to make sure that we catch the first low tide of the day. Later, when the ocean floods back into the salt marsh, the diamondback terrapins that we're trying to catch will be tucked up into spartina grass, snacking away happily on snails and other invertebrates. They're a beautiful species of turtle, pale gray skin covered with black speckles and lines, and their shells occasionally have bright orange and red highlights. During low tide, they spend their time resting in the narrow waterways and the sloughs of the marsh, made skinnier still by the retreating water. The perfect time to catch them. Our goal was to capture as many of these brackish water turtles as possible, measure them, mark them, and release them back into their homes. Later, we'd be able to get a pretty good understanding of the health of their population through careful hours of analysis, poring over thousands of data points on a computer screen. But for now, our motley crew of undergrads, PhDs, grad students, and invested locals was preparing to spend the morning dragging nets through knee-deep mud. We would get bit by no-see-ums, we'd get scraped by oyster reefs, and it would all be in the pursuit of diamondback terrapin conservation. Some of the best memories of my career so far have been made in the spartina grass and mud of the South Carolina salt marshes. There are roughly 360 species of turtle or tortoise in the world, and more than half of those are threatened with extinction, according to the IUCN's Red List. Today, we sit down with Shannon DiRuzzo, a celebrated turtle veterinarian and co-founder of Turtle Island, an organization that works to save turtles and tortoises from extinction through acute rescue, care, research, breeding, and rewilding.
Welcome back to Conservation Connection, the show where we do exactly what it sounds like. Each week, we introduce you to people working in the field of conservation. I'm Sarah Catherine.
I'm Chance.
And this is the show. So we're nearing the end of this season. Our last episode of this season will be posted on August 20th, and then the next season will begin on October 1st. Yay, Halloween month. We're getting excited. All of the things are out in the stores.
My favorite time of year, frankly.
So you'll have to go 5 weeks without hearing an official episode from us.
We're going to miss you too, don't worry.
But it's a great time to catch up on any of our older episodes. I know we have tons of new listeners, so yeah, we have like 130 episodes. I'm sure you can find something in there to entertain yourself.
One of the really cool things that's happened this season is our Conservation Connection hotline. That phone number is 706-505-0582, and I bring that up because we've gotten some really cool interactions from listeners over the past week. Quick shout out to Giselle, Herman, Roger, and Ashby, and a bunch of other people whose names you didn't tell me. Thank you for asking questions and being interested. I wanted to talk a little bit about a question that Ashby in Utah sent me. She was listening last week and learned that tribes are not eligible to receive Pittman-Robertson money, which funds conservation projects in the states, and she asked me if there's any work being done to change that. I was able to send her a really cool article about some stuff that's happening in Arizona. If you guys want to hear more about it, shoot me a text to the hotline, and I will send you that article.
As always, if you have any questions from this episode or a previous episode, feel free to send them over and we'll answer it to the best of our ability, or maybe even get in touch with the past guests that you have a question for, and we'll let you know.
If you didn't listen to last week's episode, you may not have heard that we now have our online store up and running. We are a non-profit, so if you want to support the show by wearing some awesome t-shirts, drinking out of reusable cups, or just ordering a sticker pack, you guys can go to our website, conservationconnection.co. We've got a shop on there where you can buy all of your Conservation Connection merch.
Getting into this week's episode, we are interviewing Shannon DiRuzzo, who is the co-founder of Turtle Island.
She's a veterinarian. She has spent her career rehabilitating wildlife and furthering conservation efforts. She fell in love with turtles and an Austrian, and you get to hear all about her story this week.
This episode was really fun to record because Shannon was honestly just a blast to have on the show. I think you can tell from the interactions during the show that we just had a great time talking to her and hearing about what she had to say and what Turtle Island is doing.
Yeah, she has some real fun energy, and she is basically working to save as many species of turtle as she can.
This is another episode that we recorded at EarthX, and a fun little behind-the-scenes moment is that it was actually her husband and co-founder's birthday during EarthX. So one of the after parties, there was a band, and she coordinated for them to play Happy Birthday, and she had a cake made and brought that out, and it was just so fun to see.
I mean, yeah, as co-founders and a husband and wife team, I always love to see other people who get to do this kind of work with their life partners and, honestly, kind of relationship goals. And I loved that the cake that she brought out had their concept art for the turtle dome printed on the cake. If you guys want to know what the turtle dome is, listen to the episode. We talk all about it.
So with that, let's get to the show. This week we are here with Shannon DiRuzzo. She is one of the founders of Turtle Island. Thank you so much for joining us, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. I'm very excited.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. I know you just got in from, is it Mojave Desert?
Correct.
So you were just doing some research with tortoises out there.
Yeah, I work for the Marines at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, and I run a health program with desert tortoises.
That's amazing. If you've been listening to the show for a while, we had on Tim Shields last year, who works in the same area on desert tortoises as well. You actually know each other. So this is kind of a fun, throwback for us, but of course, a completely different topic as well with some relations in there.
Yes, and I am upset that Tim Shields got here before me.
Well, that's okay. You're here now, and that's what matters.
Yes.
So how are desert tortoises connected to the Marines?
So the desert tortoise is federally protected. It's on the Endangered Species Act. So let's say the Marine Corps base, which was built in the 50s prior to the Endangered Species Act, they didn't have to follow any regulations. And so there are tortoises that still live on the regular base, but when they wanted to expand, they then had to follow regulations in order to be able to create roads, have active areas. And so we found all of the tortoises, or we did surveys to try to find every tortoise that we could find. Then they all had the health check, which is where I come in. And then when everything checked well on the list, then they got put in helicopters and flown away to another part of the desert where they are then studied in translocation sites. And then also what we're doing is, because we had pens for all the little baby tortoises or small tortoises that we couldn't put transmitters on, they're now using those pens as a head starting program. So I'm also running the pens when I'm in the United States, and we have about 1,000 baby tortoises there.
That's awesome. So I guess the general idea is the Marines want to use this section of land for whatever, training exercises
For
or
what Marines do.
for Marines being Marines.
Yes.
And before they're allowed to do that legally, they have to send in a team to find the tortoises, make sure they're healthy, and then put them out of harm's way.
Yes, that's the good summary. Yes.
So that's not the only work you do, but is that work related to Turtle Island?
Well, so what happened is that I started doing the desert tortoise work, and I was actually working for a solar site, and on that solar site happened to be an Austrian. And yes.
Just hanging out?
No, he was actually running the pens at that site. And he is the founder of Turtle Island. And I went to visit Turtle Island in Austria and fell in love with the project and Peter Proschag, the founder, and
the Austrian that was at the base.
said Austrian named Peter Proschag, and yes, and so he is no longer working in the desert. We have too big of a project, and we're really trying to make progress to take our 4 centers and put them into one center, and we at that time I think had about 800 animals. Now we have over 3,000. So I'm still coming to the desert, but my primary business is I'm the veterinarian for our turtles in Austria, and I also founded a 501c3 in the United States called Turtle Island.
So what is the purpose, the goal of Turtle Island, these centers that you have in Austria?
So our motto is rescue, research, rewild. And so what our goal is we do basically breeding conservation for the world's most endangered and overlooked species. So for example, the sea turtle is lovely and beautiful, but it's only about 3% of the overall turtle species, and they get the far majority of the funding for quite a few reasons, and good for them. That's lovely. But what we try to do is find the ones that are kind of going under the radar, that people they're just disappearing and people are not paying attention. We have at this point about 299, I believe, taxa, which is species and subspecies of the world's approximately 360 species. And so we try to do breeding exchanges with other zoos, and we do scientific breeding where we try to do the genetics so that we don't get a bottleneck. And then with the overall goal in the end, when possible, to rewilder, which is the cool word now for reintroduction.
Right. So basically the idea is that spread out across the world are all of these really kind of insular niche turtle species that are only found in a couple very vulnerable locations, and those locations are in danger. And so Turtle Island is sort of acting as this genetic reserve of, we have these species, we have their genetics, we're able to keep the population going so that as we are able to protect these natural spaces where the turtles come from, we can make sure that the turtles survive until that point.
Yeah, a good example is our project in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, when Peter started kind of looking into this species. They were just discovered in 2018, and there was only 15 on record of being known. So we went down, and at the time that we went there, which was only 2 years ago, we found 15 dead on the road. Wow. And they come from only in Puerto Vallarta. They are the world's smallest turtle species, the Vallarta mud turtle. And so they only come from just a few habitats within the city limits that are either actively being filled in, completely polluted, or have a giant divided highway in between where they want to summer and winter. And they're getting killed at 100% as they cross the road. So we have gotten together with the University of Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta, and we're in the process of building a center there. And all of the turtles that we have rescued from being run over, where we put in a reptile exclusion fence, a little fence on the side of the road, and working with the university there, got funding for a center. And then the idea is that it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of times it would be great, ideally, if we could protect the habitat that they're in and they could stay there and we could clean it up. But things are happening too quickly, and if we don't take action and save them, then they would all be dead before we would have a chance to protect anything.
I imagine you could definitely do the work now to save these animals, kind of get them out of those habitats that are being encroached on, polluted, and stuff like that. And then if we can kind of turn back the clock in some of these places, clean them up, then those turtles could go back to those spaces.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly.
What is it about turtles that makes them so at risk to being like really highly insular and then not being able to respond to environmental change quickly?
Well, they've been around for about 200 million years. And so their survival technique is different than, let's say, like something that breeds quickly, has a short life expectancy. They have a long life expectancy, most of them. And so their kind of MO and what makes them live for a long period of time is to do things sort of on a continuous basis without much variation. And over time, they do, over many, many years, they can evolve. But as we all know, the climate is changing faster than everybody had thought. They have things like what's called temperature-dependent sex determination, which means that the gender or sex of the offspring for many species is dictated by the temperature that the eggs are incubated at. So in places now that it's much warmer, you might be getting 100% females. Well, eventually you're going to need a few males. And so that can happen pretty quickly where you're only with all females. You also have the habitat destruction is happening at such a rapid rate. These are not animals that can fly away to another continent. Their method has been to form this shell, and the shell protects them, and they can weather amazing things a lot. Sometimes, fires in the area if they live deep underground, or years of drought. There are turtles that can be underground and just encased in mud until the rain comes. But if you run them over with tractors and completely destroy their habitat and put up a strip mall or a golf course, that they cannot live with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've actually talked, I think, about temperature-dependent sex determination before, and I don't know that I've ever asked that question. Is there like any consensus about what traditionally was the evolutionary advantage to having temperature, or like why that happens?
So one of the things that happens in nature is that a turtle or tortoise, they dig a burrow to lay their eggs. And so the eggs are not all at one level. And so you have the deeper ones cooler than the top ones. And so within the nest chamber, you're going to get a variation of males and females. So it is a good way to, have a nice level of amount of males and females in certain years. If it's hotter, you might get more females and cooler, but that way you can kind of assure your ratio.
So I did a little bit of digging on why this is so prevalent in turtles, and I want to share it with you. There is still a lot of debate here, but when it comes specifically to turtles, here's what I found on the benefits of temperature-dependent sex determination. The most interesting article I could find on the topic was written by Spencer and Jansen, published in 2014. Typically, turtles lay their eggs and bury them, allowing them to incubate safely underground. Many species take this a step further. When they hatch out of their eggs in late summer, they don't immediately dig themselves out. Instead, they'll spend fall and winter in their underground turtle condos, feeding off of the yolk that is still attached, and then they'll emerge in springtime when it's easier to survive above the ground. But it's critical for these hatchlings that they use the limited energy reserves they have available efficiently. If your metabolism is too high and you run out of food before winter is over, you're going to have a bad time. Spencer and Jansen's study looked at hatchling efficiency and survival rates in different conditions. They found that males, which develop in cooler incubation conditions, are better at surviving cooler overwintering conditions, and vice versa. Females, which develop in warmer incubating conditions, also survive better in warmer overwintering conditions. At the end of the day, the temperature that the eggs experience is probably a good predictor of the temperature that the hatchlings will experience, and temperature-dependent sex determination prepares them for success. Now, there's over 50 years of literature devoted to this topic, and I've tried to sum it up in just a minute or two, so I've definitely missed a lot of the subtleties here. But basically what I'm trying to say is that nature is incredible, and I'm constantly amazed by it.
And also with the kind of the last question we have with things like, the illegal trade or consumption for food, those are all taking out all of the adults. And so the female turtles and tortoises, they don't go through menopause. They can have eggs for the rest of their life. And if they live for 70 or 80 or 120 years, then they're going to have a lot of eggs, and that will put a lot into the environment. And so one female is extremely important. If you take out, 4% of the adult population, you can completely collapse an entire species and cause the extinction, because 4% is many, many years. It's 70 years of eggs that you're taking.
Removing.
Yeah. They might go in to start laying eggs at, say, 8, 12 years old, and then lay eggs for another 90 years. Well, you take that female out, that's a lot of generations of eggs that you've lost.
So going back a little bit to the overarching story of Turtle Island, your husband who founded Turtle Island with you, I read on the website that, and obviously you weren't there, but I'm sure you've heard stories, that his first word was turtle. Mm-hmm. Is this true?
That is true.
That's amazing.
His mom was not extremely pleased that it wasn't mama, but it was. So the German word is Schildkröten, which is, Kröte is a toad, and so it's a toad with a shield is the German word, and the little kid's name is Shieldy, I think. So he was saying Shieldy, I believe. Probably a German-speaking person would correct me.
Oh, German language!
Yeah.
What an interesting language!
Yes.
I love that turtle is shield toad.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I mean, it only makes sense, really.
Yeah. To come back to Turtle Island, I wanted to ask: is the name Turtle Island a nod to indigenous belief about the Earth is a giant turtle that we're all on the backs of?
It's exactly what it is. Nice research. Well done. Well done.
Thank you very much.
5 points.
Yes. Oh, yes. 5 points to Rooter House. Yeah, that's really cool. And I really like that kind of as this driving background for the organization, because turtles are really, really cool, and they don't react quickly to change. So they're going to be one of the first things that we're losing as the environment is shifting so rapidly. I just think that that's a really neat kind of underpinning to the work that you guys do.
Thank you. And they hold such a big ecological niche, and so few people see it. I mean, they are an elusive group of animals. And so, there's people who have lived in the desert their whole life and have never seen a desert tortoise as they drove by on their ATV at, 50 miles per hour, because the tortoise spent 200 million years looking like a rock. And
that's a really good thing for them.
Yes. And the soft-shelled turtles spend their entire life living underwater, except for the females that have to come out and lay eggs, which also makes the females more likely to be eaten and harvested. But you'll only see maybe a tiny little nose stick up, and you might have a giant soft-shell turtle under there. And so people don't recognize what they're doing. They're not part of that charismatic megafauna panda type of thing.
They're very cryptic.
Yes, they're definitely a cryptic species that has been getting all the attention for years, but it does seem like it's kind of coming around.
Yeah.
So you've been working with turtles and tortoises for a little over 10 years now. Were you working with them before that?
Well, I grew up on a small farm in Rhode Island, and I kind of was always really liked reptiles. And so even as a child was interested in going out and checking out in amphibians, if there were salamanders and snakes and everything, and then had a few reptiles as a child. And then as I went to vet school, there are not that many people that are interested. And so I did an internship in the zoo ward. And yeah, so I was able to get quite a bit of experience with reptiles in vet school, more than a lot of other people do who are just kind of doing your basic small animal, dogs, cats, or horses. And then I moved to Alaska and was working as a vet there at a vet clinic, which also was the vet clinic for the Alaska Zoo. And we were doing reptile rescue, working with that organization. So I saw quite a few there, still not tons. It was still Alaska. And so eventually the cold and the dark, I kind of called it good with that, and had a friend who was working in the Mojave Desert with the tortoises. The rest of the story you kind of know.
And now we come back full circle.
Now you can fill in all the blanks there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your time working, it sounds like you've had a little experience in seeing these animals when you were younger, and then of course in vet school, but more specifically with Turtle Island. 10 years in this field is really relatively short amount of time, but have you seen any significant changes, good or bad, in your time in this field?
Yeah, there have been. There's one of the things that's tough is bureaucracy, which it's in general meant to be protective and to help the animals. But at this point, we have so much bureaucracy and the regulations are not moving fast enough. For example, a zoo who wants to exchange one turtle with another zoo has to follow the same regulations and apply for the same permit as a dealer who wants to import tons of animals from the wild. You might have a different code, but you have to apply for all the same people. So it can be really difficult. It's really hindering. There's also with what I was talking about, it's called CITES, for Convention for the International Trade of Endangered Species. There's also the Nagoya Protocol, which makes it so that a zoo who wants to just send samples and take samples, or somebody who wants to take samples, has to fill out a book worth of paperwork. And so the bureaucracy has gotten worse and is actually turning off a lot of people and scientists into doing conservation work. And so that has been a really unfortunate change. It's something that we spend an immense amount of time dealing with that. The other thing is that there are so many species, like I had talked about with the Vallarta mud turtle, that are on the brink of extinction, that I think people's mindset has often been that, leave them in nature and we protect the nature and they will be fine. And it is unfortunate that the development and destruction and pollution and consumption and illegal trade are happening far faster than we can protect. and especially with the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And so the need for assurance colonies has really increased, where we are just scrambling to try to save the last few that we can. We have a project on the Turkish-Syrian border, and there we have videos of 3 days ago where they're filling in the last habitat with trash, because they fill it in with trash and then they put soil over it and then they grow olives. And it is literally the last habitat in the world for this species. So that has been kind of a difficult thing. And it's also difficult to change the mindset of people who unfortunately still have a view, I don't mean to be mean, but a naive view of what keeping them in nature, this beautiful nature that is often non-existent.
There's a lot of places where emotion gets in the way of good science and good conservation. And I would love if we had no need of assurance colonies and there was no need to remove animals from the environment. But that's unfortunately not always the reality. And the best chance for an organism can sometimes be removing pretty much everyone that we can find out so that we can preserve a larger genetic bank. There's more unrelated individuals that can breed with each other, and literally adding one individual to a small population can extend the viability of that population by generations. It's crazy how those numbers work out, because it's like exponential growth. But I think it's really important to have the conversation that it's hard, but it's important, and it is the best possible chance of survival for some of these organisms.
This point ties in well to our last episode where we talked about black-footed ferret conservation. Every single black-footed ferret in the world that we know of right now is descended from just 7 individuals who were removed from the wild in the 1980s. By providing a safe, predator-free environment, we have the amazing opportunity to restore populations that have been decimated by human effects like development. It's a hard choice to make, removing a species from the environment. But in some situations, it's simply the best chance that a species has to survive.
So with all of that being said, I think it's sometimes hard to see the sunshine of the Mojave Desert for the darkness of the Alaska winters. But what are some of the places where you've seen success stories and you've seen, some really positive outcomes for some of these species?
So we have that project that we started in Bangladesh and in India. And when Peter started doing the genetics, at one point they had said, the kind of scientific community said, no, it's all one species. They're fine. There's thousands of them. They're all in Myanmar, Bangladesh, India. There's fine. He did the genetics. And at that point, when he proved that it was a separate species, there was only 2 individuals that they knew. Over time, he was able to find a few others. They keep them on a chain. They drill a hole through their shell and they keep them on a chain in a pond in their community until they can eat them. And so we were able to rescue some from those places and start breeding centers in Bangladesh. We have 2 in Bangladesh, and there was another one that was started in India. Now we're up to about, I think, around 1,000.
Wow.
We have the only breeding group outside of their country of origin in Austria. As I had kind of talked to you guys a little earlier, our organization was actually started by Peter Proschog's father, Rainer Proschog. And so these individuals, some of our main breeding groups were started way before any of these regulations came into place. And now that we have all this bureaucracy, we can't even do the conservation that we can only do the conservation that we're doing today because they were brought in before the regulations were put in place to actually help them.
Wild.
Yeah. Is there any indication that we can kind of fix this bureaucracy at all? Because I know you said it's keeping a lot of researchers out. Like, people are like, well, there's so much to try to do, so many things, red tape that I have to go through, essentially. Like, what's our next step forward? That may be a bigger conversation than we can have here. But
I mean, I think anybody that's tried to change legislation and bureaucracy, I mean, especially because it's a worldwide legislation.
I was going to ask, who writes and enforces CITES? It's an international regulation.
I believe that the main office, I want to say, is in Brussels, which we have actually gone to discuss some of these things. And the difficult thing is like that there is, even though it's worldwide, everything is up for interpretation, right? There's nothing is ever set in stone. And so you might have Italy interpreting something different. It might be okay to bring the same thing into Italy as it is. Austria might say no and Italy says yes.
Even though they're quoting the same law.
Yes, and they're both in the EU. We've had this happen. So
is this in place to prevent like illegal animal trade?
Yes. So CITES is Convention for the International Trade. So it does not stop anyone from consuming the animals or killing the animals within their own country. It only stops them from taking out. So when they put a CITES regulation on a species, it might completely stop, let's say, for example, Turtle Island, from being able to rescue those animals, bring them to our center, and have an assurance colony at our center. Meanwhile, it's legal to eat them and kill them in their own country. So that is also where, because a lot of people kind of have this thing like, let's just upregulate them, let's put them at the highest protection because really we're saving them. But you're really not saving them. It depends on what the risk is. If the risk is local consumption or if the risk is complete habitat destruction, then stopping the international trade is not going to do it.
Right.
If it's pet trade, then yes, then that would do it.
Right.
That would help in that situation. So you kind of have to look at it in an individual basis. We try to discuss this with people. There's unfortunately a lot of what we refer to as armchair biologists, where people that are not actually doing field work or even ones who are applying for these permits to really understand how this can affect things. So like, for example, you have a confiscation. People always think, oh, this is great. There's a confiscation at the airport, 2,000 turtles, giraffes, birds, whatever.
Right.
I guess not 2,000
I would
giraffes.
love to see 2,000
That would
giraffes.
be
I know. Once I
impressive.
threw out the giraffe thing, I was like, maybe that's never happened.
Maybe. Who knows?
I know. I'm like, I would also like to go to that one. So anyway, let's say you have 2,000 turtles. There's no center who knows how to take care of every single species and is ready to take on that amount. So it'd be great if there was something in place that said, here's an emergency situation. Let's look for the centers who can take 2,000 birds or of this species and look. And so we just actually were able to get animals from Taipei, Taiwan, from the Taiwan Zoo that were confiscated, I believe, 4 years ago. And we have been fighting to try to import them for 4 years. And so many animals die in the centers after being confiscated, waiting for bureaucracy to finally say yes or no, while they could have a better place to go. But someone in an office is looking for a way to check no, because it's safer that way a lot of times.
Yeah.
The other thing that's good, though, not to harp on all the bad things, is that we used to see a lot of meat markets, and there would be photos of endangered species on meat markets. And it gets back to that whole thing where it wasn't necessarily illegal for them to be on the meat market in their town. The public awareness is changing. And so that may still happen illegally on the back street, but there does tend to be that awareness now. And there is legislation and regulations in countries that they are enforcing more. And so there are positive changes that are happening with quite a few of these markets and illegal trade.
That's fantastic because, I've always heard that basically, especially with turtles in particular, two of the largest threats are illegal wildlife trade to collectors around the world. So you have this endangered species that's really pretty, or, really cool, and it goes for high dollar value. You can sell it on the black market. And that's, going out and collecting those from wild populations can decimate them. And then also just for consumption, especially when there's not a lot of industrial agriculture or large-scale food sources, you're going out and you're gathering the food that you can or the food that you have traditionally eaten. Mm-hmm. And those are two of the bigger threats. Are there any other major threats for turtles that, you had mentioned habitat destruction?
Yes, I would say that's probably the biggest.
So what are some of the ways that you are using technology to leverage companies and the public's ability to help protect these animals?
Well, we've just joined forces in the last year with a company called Green Encoded. And there's a new EU regulation in the European Union, which is basically saying in the past, in order to, let's just say you want to call something organic, you have to actually follow some regulations, where in the past, in order to call yourself green, you just had to paint your sign green or just put green on your website and you were green. And so now those same regulations are coming in place. And so we're working with a company called Green Encoded, which has basically used blockchain technology, and they have tokenized our turtles. One of the initiatives is for biodiversity, protection of biodiversity, and so we fit under that category. And so companies who want to receive the subsidies, benefits from calling themselves green will need to invest in these. And so all of our turtles are now a token. And so let's say a species of least concern is worth less than a species that is extinct in the wild. And so the organizations will be able to go on and, like an Amazon website, click on, I need 5 extincts in the wild in order to meet my initiatives, and call myself green. And so we're using technology in that way.
That's so cool. I mean, the idea that like a business that wants to be green and be perceived as green is regulated by the government to say, okay, you can get a lot of benefits from being green, but in order to actually be green, you have to put your money where your mouth is. Go on Amazon and support Fred the tortoise, who needs, money, dollars to help protect his species. Add to cart. Boom. Now we've put our money where our mouth is. Like, making that frictionless is so cool.
It's not actually Amazon, though. We have our own website. It's like Amazon. It's as simple as Amazon, but we have our own site.
That makes sense.
I know, because I don't want somebody going on Amazon and be like, where are the turtles? Where's this green encoded thing? I've been looking for turtles. And I believe it's also with companies who want to do business with the EU. So even companies within the United States or worldwide who want to do business with the EU and call themselves green also have to follow those same regulations. So,
and you were also saying that y'all are working with genetics as well, right?
Yeah, so it's really important to prevent the bottleneck effect of having so few animals. And so we really focus on doing the genetics of the species of the remaining animals so that we can ensure that, one is that it actually is that species and not a new species or subspecies, because there are sometimes when you do the genetics, you realize that, there's a whole, even though they look really similar, this might be a completely different species. And if we can figure out where they're from, let's say if it's from a confiscation, then you may have an entirely new area that needs to be protected. And unless you are doing the genetics, you can hybridize and end up with a kind of mishmash of species. Also, the technology has improved so much that you really can, do a lot with the maternal and paternal lines. And you can also figure out, we've had things where you try to go, well, is it better to put one male and one female together? Because sometimes it's better to put a bunch of males in with 1 or 2 females, because then there's competition and they do better. Where a male and a female, sometimes it could be like, the old man and the old woman at home, and they're like, oh, what are you doing tonight? Watching TV? Me too. And so...
But if you have to compete with George and Steven, you're like...
Add another dude in there. That gets things riled up. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you also have this really cool project that y'all have going on with Turtle Island called the Turtle Dome. Is that correct?
Yes.
I would love to hear more about that.
Okay. So our plan, right now we've grown organically, whereas I said it started out as this collection from the founder's father. And then it grew and grew and grew as there were more animals confiscated, more need for us to form assurance colonies and breeding groups. And so now we have 4 locations with over 3,000 turtles. And logistically, that is a nightmare. You have to have 4 fridges and 4 things of medication, and you never, staff 4 areas and everything. So our goal, we also really want to educate the public, and we would like to create more awareness. And so we are planning what's called the Turtle Dome, or the epicenter for turtle biodiversity. And this will include a large dome in the glass house or greenhouse in the shape of a turtle. And we will have a large portion of our animals there. The animals that do not get stressed with a lot of people going by them, and that are easy. I mean, there are turtles where, even a turtle lover like myself would say, that turtle compared to the next one, they both sort of look like brown potatoes. So something that's going to really excite the public, or a turtle that spends its entire life sitting under the sand, is not going to be great for people to walk by and see. And so we'll have a large portion of them there where we can do education. And people can come by just like a regular zoo. And then there will be other centers, private, at the same location, where we will have breeding for the endangered species and for the species that are very stress sensitive. And so the plan is to have multiple, because then you need a tropical zone and a subtropical zone. And so there would be multiple smaller greenhouses next to and on the same property as the dome. So we can kind of take them in and out as we need to for breeding and give the ladies some peace while they need to lay their eggs and that sort of thing.
Totally understandable. And that's in Austria?
So at this point, all of our centers are in Austria. We have programs with turtles from every continent of the planet except for Antarctica, which does not have turtles.
Fair enough.
Yes. And the center could really be located anywhere. So it doesn't have to be in Austria. We have been given land by the local government to put it on there, but it could be somewhere else. With bureaucracy, it would be hard to get them out of the EU.
Yes, that's fair.
Yes. Also, every time you move turtles, you may lose a year or two with the ladies. They might not produce eggs. And so the shortest distance and easiest move is best. But honestly, wherever we can build the center, we would happily put it. I keep voting for a beach in Italy.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if my vote is really has a lot of weight financially, but I'm voting for it. I keep throwing it out there.
She sounds just like you, Sarah Catherine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, same thing I would do. I mean, you get a lot of tourists in Italy, right? Like beaches. It's great.
Like, what about the Amalfi Coast? I think there's somewhere south, maybe.
Yeah,
somewhere warm and beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know.
That sounds great. Okay, I have a very important question for you.
Purple.
What do you think the question was?
That was a great answer, though. See, the key of a good answer is confidence. Yeah. No, my question for you is, do you have a favorite turtle?
Oh. All right. So I am actually always amazed when turtle geeks come to our center and they'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe you have blah, blah, blah turtle. And I think, why that one? I mean, it really does look so similar to the other one, but
looks like a potato, like you said.
Right. Or it's just like, these are so similar, I can barely tear them apart. I tend to have like an individual that I like. And my stepson has noticed that the only ones with names are the ones who have been my patients for a while.
That's fair.
And so we have a Aubrey's flapshell turtle, Cycloderma aubrei, which is from the Congo. And I had to do a really big surgery on her a few years ago. She is the mother of all of the offspring that have been born in captivity in the world. She's the only mother. Wow. And she almost died. And I did a big surgery on her. And her name is Audrey. I know it's super creative, from Aubrey's to Audrey. But so I really love Audrey.
What does she look like? If you could describe what an Aubrey's flat-billed turtle looks like.
So she has a face like a vacuum cleaner. So
that's a great start.
She has these lips that kind of stick out on the sides, and they do this thing where they eat, where it's an implosion. So they strike at fish, and they just basically suck it in really fast. And she's about 22 pounds. When I did surgery on her, she was about 15 pounds. And they are very colorful when they're young, and they look like if you shine light on the side of a river and you see in between the shade and you have, say, a reddish dappling effect on the sides of a river, that the babies have that pattern to keep them camouflaged with these little black feet that are like little paws. They're so cute. And then as they get older, that turns kind of more into overall brownish color as they would move into the deeper water. Then all of those kind of striking patterns go away. They still have a very like orange neck, but more of a dark brown shell because they're now deeper in the water, so they don't need all of those striking patterns to camouflage them.
That's super cool.
Yeah, that's a great description. And y'all actually worked with PhotoArc to come take some pictures of your turtles, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Joel Sartori came.
Is there a place where people can go to see those photos?
Interesting question. We put quite a few of them because one of the amazing things with Joel Sartori's PhotoArc is that he allows you to use the photos for publicity because it's quite a lot of big effort when he comes to make sure all of our models are perfectly clean and doing what they need to do.
Oh, yeah.
And so...
get them to come out of their shell a little bit.
Yes, exactly. And the algae doesn't have sand on it or anything. So we've made postcards out of them when we use them in our social media. And my guess is that there is one for his PhotoArc, which probably has all of them, but we don't have all of ours listed.
So I just Googled it while we were sitting here. JoelSartori.com is, I think you can access all of his image there. It says, search 70,586 images and videos. So I'm going to assume that most of them are up there, but
yeah, probably.
That would be a good
so
first
step. So if you're
step.
listening, check that out.
Yes. And I know like he just tagged us on Instagram he had a photo of us, of one of our turtles on there, but we don't have them all centrally located for us. You just have to why we do that is that you have to just keep watching our social media and our newsletters to just have it come in one at a time. We just give it to you all at once and just stop watching.
You'd get bored.
Little sprinkles of turtle throughout your week.
Yes. You're like, oh, little Joe Sartori.
Did Audrey? Which is the name?
Her name is Audrey.
Okay.
But she's an Aubrey's flapshell turtle.
Okay. Did Audrey make it to the photo shoot?
Because he only photographs ones that he has never photographed before.
Oh, that's fair.
And so I think that he had photographed them somewhere else. The babies have had a lot of fanfare because they're the only babies, hatchlings in the world. And as I said, they have these little black feet and they like move around with their like little paws swimming around. They're so cute.
That's precious.
And they eat only like live fish. And so they're just these little killers.
So what I'm getting is if you want to see these cute videos and pictures, go to your Instagram.
Yes, go to our Instagram. We have YouTube channel. We have Facebook, LinkedIn, and a website. And you should sign up for our newsletter, which is amazing. And we have it only once a month. We're not a total pain in the butt with it. You're not going to get like a million from us. So you can go on turtleisland.org and sign up for our newsletter. And you can get it in English or German.
Nice. And maybe you'll get to vote on where the turtle dome goes if it goes to Italy.
Yes, I know. I think if you just happen to have an extra 25 mil hanging out, just give us a call.
Easy.
We're totally
easy.
I will pick up the phone.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really fun conversation, and I can't wait to hear your talk later this week.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you had as much fun listening to that episode as we obviously did recording it.
And if you happen to have a bunch of money laying around and you're going to throw some to Turtle Island, throw some our way too. We're a nonprofit. I would love that.
So, Chance, what did you learn this week?
It's not so much something I learned this week, but more something that I like talking about. The idea that we don't really know what constitutes one species versus another, especially when you're talking about something that basically looks like a brown potato, right? So with turtles, you have to do a lot of genetic analysis. And because their lifestyle, even species that look really similar, if they're geographically isolated from each other, they can have different genetics and therefore be different species. So when you're doing these kinds of conservation efforts, you have to be really careful not to interbreed them because you can mix the genetics and turn two species into one hybrid species.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what I learned, which is that there are just a lot of species of turtles. I don't think I'd necessarily thought about it.
I mean, you're not the one with a herpetology degree.
That's fair.
Right? It's like, hey, that's a turtle. That's also a turtle. They're different? What?
Yeah. I mean, and I also think here in the Southeast, like we kind of have a handful of turtles that we see a lot, and you're like, okay, yeah, those are all turtles, they're all different, but you don't think about like every other place in the world has that too, and so we just have hundreds and hundreds of turtle species.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it. I'm pretty sure in our stretch of the Chattahoochee River, we've got 26 different species of turtle that are present. That's a lot of turtles. I mean, that represents, 7% of the world's species just in our river? Something like that?
Maybe. I know someone who would know.
So what do we have coming down the pipeline next week?
Next week, we're talking to Dr. Jennifer McGowan, who works in the field of decision science.
Which I didn't really know was a thing, but she explained it really well. It's basically, I mean, we live in a world now where we can take so many measurements in a millisecond, right? You can have tens of thousands of data points in a very short period of time. The limiting factor no longer is, do we have the information? It's, can we analyze the information in a way that provides useful answers to our questions? And that's what decision science is all about. Taking a look at this massive ocean of data that we have and getting the best possible outcomes by using that data.
That's something I really enjoy about the show, and that we actually literally earlier today got a message about from someone saying how much they loved that we cover such a diverse range of topics on the show.
I mean, yeah, you don't have to be a turtle conservationist dragging nets through the mud in order to contribute. If you're really good at data science, we need you. If you're really good at art, we need you. If you're into policy, whatever it is, whatever your thing is, you can leverage that to help protect this planet.
There's definitely a space for anyone in any field to be involved in saving the planet.
A couple of things we want to plug before we end this episode. Number one, you should text us on the Conservation Connection hotline. I want to know your questions. I want to know what you thought about this episode. So shoot me a text, 706-505-0582.
It has literally been making Chance's week when you text on the hotline, so definitely send us some of those text questions, just hellos, how you found the show. We want to know. We want to get to know you.
Other things, I'm really excited that we're selling a run of relief prints that I did of black-footed ferrets. Half of the proceeds from those prints go directly to the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation in South Dakota for black-footed ferret conservation. You guys can find those prints on our website, conservationconnection.co. They're $20. We would love for you to support us and black-footed ferret conservation at the same time. We're going to stop selling those prints at the end of the month. So if you want them, go check them out.
Lastly, we would really appreciate it if you leave us a review wherever you listen. I know that you can leave a written review on Apple Podcasts, so that's always amazing. We love reading those as well, and it helps other people find the show too. But regardless of where you listen, if you could leave us a 5-star rating if you feel like you really love our show, then that would be amazing.
Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.